Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. It's been a hot minute. Today I wanted to talk about trauma and confronting it, and in particular, I wanted to talk about kind of mundane trauma, if I can term it that way, which in my experience is unavoidable. I think, honestly, I believe it's a kind of proving ground in a way, you know. I think it's an inherent part of life to, you know, carry some conditioning with you from childhood. And I think it goes both ways in terms of it being positive and negative conditioning. But I think often these little traumas are easily overlooked or just dismissed on a personal level because they seem so small and mundane. You end up kind of shrugging it off instead of really facing it and questioning it. So I'm not talking about like really intense, traumatic situations that you go through. I'm talking more about like little things that, maybe you had a moment of embarrassment as a small kid, and that kind of situation has led you to, constrain yourself in some other aspect of your life that's related to that. So, like, for instance, this is stupid, but I mean, it's not stupid, it's valid, right? That's kind of, here I am confronting my own conditioning. But I have always loved singing and never had any formal training in it or anything. I don't think I'm naturally very gifted or good or whatever. It's just, one of those things that is very, joyful to me and always has been as a kid. And I've always wanted to and be good at it and whatever. Anyway, so I remember in like grade 1 having to audition to be a part of the choir and not getting in and kind of like internalizing that message that, oh, I can't sing, I'm not good enough to be part of the singing group, which means I'm not good enough to sing at all. And it kind of like stopped me for years and years and years and years, to the point where it's like I couldn't even enjoy it for myself, by myself, with no other people judging me. And it's a small example, but I think it kind of illustrates the point of you carry that experience with you and you kind of hold it as a undeniable truth when it's not, it's some random judgment that somebody made in a passing context that actually has no bearing on your identity or who you are or being good enough or whatever, it seems so silly to have something like that limit you. So yeah, I'm here to kind of point out that a lot of us, I think, carry these little barriers around with us. And it's an opportunity, it's an opportunity when you notice them to reflect and ask yourself, is this really what I want to believe about myself or about the world? And is it actually true? Or is it just a type of conditioning that I've drawn out from a unpleasant experience, where I was maybe embarrassed or made to feel like I'm not really, I'm not up to par, or I'm an outsider for some reason. Yeah, so I think these walls are quite common. And I think until you kind of see it, it keeps informing your decision making. And I think it's pretty universal. We all have these experiences that we've kind of internalized, as I said before. And that we kind of then just shrug off and take for granted their impact on our lives and on how we engage with other opportunities that are presented to us. So, it's like you can't really heal from something if you don't first acknowledge its existence and then face it honestly. At least that's been my experience with emotional pain that sticks around for, it sticks around forever until you actually see it and try and confront it. Excuse me, I'm picking at my skin. It's I'm just looking at my notes here. Yeah, so I think what I wanted to say mostly is that I think so much of what we internalize as traumatic, if I think like 90, if not all of it, 90% of all can be attributed to our feeling of safety in a social context, because we're social animals and beings, and from birth your survival is absolutely dependent on others, on a caretaker. And when that feeling of safety and security is threatened in any way, which it often is, in a kind of, like I'm trying to say here, a mundane or nuanced way, it's not life-threatening, but there's still a threat to your sense of safety and belonging, socially, which again is almost like we almost place that higher, that social survival and inclusion. It's almost like placed higher on our list of needs than basic survival requirements like food and water, until it's like, until you're in a legitimate survival situation. But, I think for a lot of us, for the most part, I'm not here to take anything for granted, but if you're in a situation where you are fed, you're housed, you're clothed, and you still feel unsafe, it probably has to do with a social circumstance, not feeling like you belong anywhere. And, this video isn't about how to heal that. I think that's a really personal and individual process, and probably requires some external help or perspective if you're not able to gain that by yourself. I don't think we're meant to do all of this alone, which again is why that social validation and acceptance and belonging is so critical for us, because we're meant to help each other and live in community. And I think part of what ails us so much is that we're more connected than ever, but it feels superficial a lot of the time, because most of the time we're not living in community. We're isolated as much as we are connected, because on a day-to-day basis you're not interacting with the community in the way that you would have, 500 years ago, where everybody works together in your community to try and sustain the community and each other. And your well-being isn't just reliant on your own efforts, it's reliant on the effort and the success of the community. So I think we place a lot of pressure on ourselves in this context today, where we're actually living out of balance, and we're trying to fix these you can call them problems, but like these challenges that we're facing. We try and fix them with the wrong solutions, right? When like really most of us just need to feel safe and connected, connected to the land, to family, to community, to nature, to just the earth, like our home. So it's so easy, actually. Maybe easy is the wrong word, but it's so simple to be happy when you just stop thinking so fucking much. Yeah, like, I don't know, that's my experience. If I just quiet the voices, if I make my own effort, if I do my part to quiet the voices. I sound like I'm crazy, but I think we all have like internal dialogues. Actually, I know that's not true. We don't all have internal dialogues, but we all have internal mental processes that happen. And whether that is a voice that you hear or just however you formulate inside of your brain, we can make our own situation so much harder for ourselves when we spiral around it, instead of just keeping a neutral perspective. Yeah, okay, let me look at my notes here. I kind of went off script, but that's just my style. Yeah, I think I'm gonna just end off by saying that it's easy to close yourself off from experiences when you're not feeling connected. That was my experience, definitely. Not even when you're not feeling connected, but when you don't feel safe, right? It's easy to restrict yourself from trying new things, because that idea of not being immediately perfect or, stellar or full of talents or the best at whatever activity you endeavor to pursue, it's weird how that sense of perfectionism is so prevalent now. And I think that's just the state of our media consumption these days, where you go on Instagram or whatever, and you're just faced with the most successful people in a field, whatever that is, and it leaves you feeling like, I'm never gonna get there, but you don't see all the progress and the kind of the baby steps that somebody had to take to get there. So I think it's important to just highlight that, it is a process. It's not, nobody is born able to do anything perfectly without working for it. And that's kind of the challenge that we have, The spectrum goes in all directions, right? So like if I cut myself off from painful experiences, I'm also cutting myself off from equally as joyful and fulfilling experiences, because you can't experience one side of a duality without the other. It's just like a physical conundrum that doesn't make sense. How would you even know what pain is or pleasure without the opposite to compare it to? That's how we create meaning, is through contrasted experiences. um so yeah, I think it's available to all of us to heal, to grow, to make the most out of difficult situations, out of our own walls that we've built. Like, I firmly believe that all of it is an opportunity. Even the most horrible thing that you could go through, for me, like, my experience with cancer was definitely up there. And I think the thing about that is that that's an impersonal thing that happened to me. It's an event that I lived through, but it wasn't another person that inflicted it on me. But I have had experiences where there is somebody hurting me, right? So I think in those situations it can be more difficult when there's a person, in a way. Although it goes, again, not like, challenge is never easy, and it doesn't help to try and compare your trauma to another person's trauma, because that just stops you from facing it for what it is and actually trying to move past it. So yeah, I think it's all valid. I'm not going to try and say that one type of trauma is easier to overcome than another, because I don't think that's fair. I think that makes it kind of, it's a way to make somebody with this kind of mundane trauma that I'm talking about feel like that is actually not something that they should have any kind of issues from. And it's like, again, that just stops you from actually dealing with it when you're not able to recognize that it's actually having an impact on your life. So just saying it's okay doesn't help you. Saying something like it's going to be okay, I think, is more helpful, because it gives you just, you're acknowledging that right now it's not okay, but it will be okay again. Anyway, so I think it's not easy, but I think it begins with being willing and not feeling ashamed or belittling your experiences in any way. Yeah, don't feel stupid for carrying around the trauma of your inner child. It's totally normal, and we all do it. The opportunity and the challenge now, as a not child, as a grown up, as an adult, is to take that nugget and polish it as much as you can, turn that experience into something positive. And the way to do that is individual, but I would say it starts with, if it was unpleasant, which in this case, I'm assuming it was, what can you learn from that? How does that experience affect the way that you move through the world and treat others in turn? Because I think at the end of the day, that's really what it's about. Your trauma is there to try and show you what works and what doesn't, and how you can show up in the world so that the world is a better place for everyone. So yeah, that's my 2 cents, my hot take on trauma and the role it has in our lives. So all of this to say, I think it's totally normal, and please take the opportunity to have it be something greater, you know? Take your poo and polish it into a beautiful diamond. Sorry, that's so gross. Okay, I'm gonna stop now. Thank you for watching if you did. I hope it was in some way relatable or just insightful. Yeah, feel free to drop me a comment and let me know if you can relate, if you have your own opinions. Yeah,